Ok, bonjour tout le monde. Buenos días a todos. Es un placer de tenerlos todos aquí con nosotros para hablar de este tema de racismo en América Latina, un tema obviamente que negamos en nuestras sociedades. En Amérique latine, bon, vous le savez, c'est une région qui est caractérisée par une diversité culturelle, autant la présence de populations afrodescendantes, de personnes autochtones. Et souvent, qu'est-ce qu'on remarque, c'est que ces populations-là sont les plus marginalisées. Donc, il existe des inégalités, des discriminations raciales qui sont vraiment ancrées dans la société. Et évidemment, ça a un impact sur l'éducation, le travail, la distribution des ressources et à certains égards, la violence et l'instabilité politique. Donc aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment un plaisir d'avoir Shirley Sands parmi nous. Donc Shirley Sands est une experte sur les questions de diversité, équité et inclusion. Elle travaille dans différentes organisations en Amérique latine. Elle est bien évidemment basée entre Buenos Aires et Bogota. Et vraiment, elle a vraiment une expertise sur les enjeux liés à la diversité culturelle, à la religion. Donc, Shirley, thank you so much for being here with us today. Juste quelques petites informations. As you see, the presentation will be in English, but for the questions, you could ask them in English, French or Spanish. Donc, vous pourrez poser vos questions à la fin en anglais, français, espagnol. S'il vous plaît, pour les questions, mettez vos questions sur le Q&A. Donc, if you have any questions, please make sure to write them down in the Q&A. Just to let you know, we were supposed to have American Sign Language interpretation. We had some issues yesterday. One of the interpreters wasn't available, so we tried everything to have an interpretation, but it's not working for today. Simplement vous dire que nous étions supposés d'avoir une interprétation en American Sign Language. Cependant, il y a une interprète qui s'est désistée, donc on a tout fait pour chercher une interprète. C'est pas évident, donc on s'en excuse. Donc, d'ici là, je vais laisser la parole à Shirley. Vous pouvez écrire sur le Q&A. Et so, it's your time, Shirley. Thank you so much.
Hello. Well, bonjour a todo el mundo. Hello, my name is Shirley Sainz, as Viviana just said. Thank you very much for inviting me to this space to have a small conversation or actually, share some of my perspectives about racism and cultural diversity in Latin America. It's my pleasure to be in this space with you. And I also encourage you, as Viviana said, to post your questions and also comments in the chat, in the Q&A section, so we can have also a small conversation after my presentation. So I imagine you can hear me well, and if not, please just type in the chat, and I will show my screen now with some slides that I have prepared for you today. Okay. Can you see my slides now?
Yes, it works.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I think that this is the conversation about racism in Latin America, it's a very interesting conversation that also had a new relevance, I would say, in Latin America, especially after the facts, what happened last year with George Floyd. I think that initiated a conversation in Latin America in a different level about if there is something like racism in Latin America or not, and I think that it would be very interesting for you, to share those perspectives, what is happening here, what is the reality here in terms of Indigenous people and also Afro-descendants, and of course exchange some ideas and make some comparisons about what is happening in each of your countries, and if our issues or problematics are the same or not. That will be very welcome. Sometimes when I talk about this topic, I like to share the story of Tenoch Huerta. Enoch is a Mexican actor, and it's very interesting because he, in an interview with the newspaper El País, he tells the story that one day he just decided to talk to his casting director, and he just asked and demanded, "Hey, why do you? I mean, why do you don't call me for roles, to play roles, like different roles? Because you always call me for the same roles in movies. I'm always the person that is the thief. I'm always the person that is the rapist. I'm always the cheating person. I'm always the pederast. I mean, why are you looking for me just for those specific roles when you are, doing the casting for me for participating in movies or in TV shows?" And he was somehow accept, like, because, and so also he said, "I can also play other kind of roles. I can be the businessman, the successful businessman. I can be the young university student. I can be a doctor, an entrepreneur, and actually I am a journalist, so I could certainly play the role of a journalist." And what his manager said was that, "I know that you can play all these roles because you are really professional, but when I present you to these roles of a good person, it's not what people want. It's not that people are looking for. It's not what they are, demanding to me. For example, when I present you to be this successful businessman or a doctor, they usually say, I'm afraid that is not a good idea because he's too moreno, like brown. No, he looks like too Mexican," they say, no? And if something were wrong about being Mexican. So I really like his story because it really tells us how your skin color, in our Latin American region can really impact on your opportunities, on your job opportunities, and also in the development of your career, and of course in your income. So that is a reality in our country, that your skin color can impact, your future, your life, your job. And I think that I think that's a very important or a very nice story to start this conversation, just to make you aware that something that really happens in our countries, even when sometimes we think that it doesn't happen, that is not a matter, it's not an issue that we have in Latin America. So I wanted to share with you some facts about this cultural diversity in Latin America, specifically with these two specific topics about, racism, about Indigenous people and also Afro-descendants, but also about racism or xenophobia with other countries, especially in Latin America. So what happened? When we were in the colonization process, and also during the first century of the first century of our countries being independent, we received a lot of immigration, especially during the colonization process. And this immigration were somehow similar, somehow different, depending on the countries in Latin America. And of course, this early immigration really shaped the culture that we have, and actually is a source of cultural differences and similarities between Latin American countries. And we can tell about those differences, for example, looking at the food, like the typical food that we can have in Colombia or in Peru or in Argentina or in Brazil, actually has a lot of traits from Italians or from Germans or from Spanish. So we have somehow integrated, some of these cultural traits of these cultures of these immigrants in our culture nowadays. And I would say that also some of the African, culture and traits and traditions are also integrating in our culture, but sometimes we are not aware of that. We are more aware of the traditions that we integrated from European or US American cultures than the traits that we integrated from American. cultures. And I would say also that we accept more nowadays in the present, we accept more this kind of immigration that can come from Europe or from, the North America, and even from some parts of Asia. But what happens today is that we receive a lot of immigration from bordering countries. For example, in Argentina, we have a lot of immigration from Bolivia, from Peru, from Paraguay, and in Colombia, also from Ecuador, for example, from Peru. And you know that nowadays we have this current situation with Venezuela, and we are receiving immigrants from Venezuela all over the world, and especially in Latin America, being Colombia, Ecuador, and Brazil. Some of the countries that more receive this kind of immigration. And what I see, what I can see working along during the past 10 years working in different countries of Latin America, is that these immigrants, we can welcome these immigrants depending on the country they are from. So we usually don't like more the immigrants that are from the bordering countries, and especially if their skin color is not white or is not Caucasian, and especially if they are also migrant economical immigrants. That they have economical needs, and that's the reason why they move. So usually we don't accept that immigration. We express some xenophobia towards that, but we are more available and curious and open to receive immigration, for Europe or from North American countries. So working, for example, with the UN, United Nations Agency for Refugees, I have heard some stories about people coming from the Central America, for example. There was this girl from Dominican Republic. She was studying here. She was a student, and she told me that so many times she was just walking on the street, and men around her in the day. It was not at night, and they will. People in general will confuse her with a prostitute, and start saying and yelling things like bad things to her that make her feel unsafe, and secure, just because she was Black, and maybe people here in Argentina, they were not used to that, or they were just thinking, that she would be, a prostitute, just that. So that kind of things happen. Also, I remember there was a person from IT, and she told me a story that he was, for example, going to the subway, and he just sat down, and then the person who was next to them got up. Those things that we just don't know what happened, no? But these are some behavior that we can see. And also regarding, for example, immigrants from Venezuela coming to all different countries in Latin America, I just start to hear comments, these traditional comments, oh, they are stealing our jobs, or I don't like the way they talk, they are too noisy, they should go back to their country. And not only with Venezuelans, but also mainly also with people from Bolivia or from Ecuador. Depending also on the context that we have that. And I see it, for example, in Colombia. Sometimes I remember even talking with my family, with my brothers, with my mother, usually when they see in the street a person that is more brown, or browner, she just asks, oh, maybe he or she is Venezuelan. And it was like, he or she can be from any part of Colombia. Like, why are you asking if he or she is Venezuelan? So we have this focus, on just like taking a defense position about those other cultures or bordering immigrants and some racist attitudes. And regarding the indigenous population in Latin America, I have to say that we have in Latin America more than 800 indigenous groups. Being Brazil and Colombia the countries that more indigenous groups have, but also if we talk about the percentage of the participation of indigenous people in the countries, I would say that one of the countries that have most indigenous is of course Bolivia. Then we have Guatemala. Then we have Peru, Mexico as some of the countries that have a higher representation or percentage of indigenous people in their countries. And then we have like so many many indigenous languages that are spoken nowadays in Latin America. We have almost 600 indigenous languages, and a fifth of these languages are at risk of extinction because they are not promoted, because sometimes they are not valued, they are not promoted, and people don't feel, usually we are not taught to feel proud about our indigenous origins, for example, no? So there is a colleague which I work with, who is Marco Avilés, and he's from Peru. And he says that his mother and his father and also his grandparents, they are indigenous. So he's indigenous. Even if he is not more working in the countryside, he got, he's educated, he earned a doctorate, a PhD, and he's now living in Canada. He's an indigenous person. But sometimes in our imaginary, in our mental model, we think that if you are indigenous, it's something that is in the past, maybe it's part of the history, not of your present. And if you are indigenous, you are in the countryside, you don't study, you don't participate in the labor market. So it's difficult for us to imagine that you are indigenous and you don't just look like an indigenous, the kind of indigenous people that we have in the imagination. So Marco, my colleague, he usually says that, for example, to talk with his grandparents, he needs a translator, because when he was young, he was feeling pressure not speaking the indigenous language of their family, but speaking only Spanish as a way to differentiate himself from the stereotypes that usually we have about indigenous people, and be accepted and integrated to the more white society or class society that can just work and access to university and other opportunities in general, no? So that's a very interesting thing, because we have, what I want to say is that we have a lot of diversity, but sometimes we don't appreciate that, and we don't recognize that, or we don't value that. Yeah, and talking about the Afro-descendant population, it's very interesting too, because in most countries, the adoption of the term Afro-descendant is still only partial. There are some countries that are not familiar with using this term, and actually, as we also have like negative stereotypes about Afro-descendant population, people try to differentiate themselves from the Afro-descendant identity. For example, in Venezuela, people prefer to call themselves an moreno, that would be like browner or mixed race, and they reject the term Afro-descendant because it implies that I belong to this group, so I belong also to the same tags that other people put to the people of my identity. And that was very interesting to me, because, for example, in the Dominican Republic, most mixed race Afro-descendants, they prefer to identify themselves as Indios. And I remember I was there in the Dominican Republic. I went for work, and I was with the taxi driver, and he was telling me about this problem or issue they had with immigrants from Haiti. So, and he told me, there are many people from Haiti in the streets, you can easily identify them. And I was like, wow, that's very difficult to me. I cannot identify them. So I asked him, how do you identify Haiti? I don't know how to say that, but people from Haiti, how do you identify if a person is from Haiti or if it is Dominican Republic, from the Dominican Republic? And he said, it's very easy, Shirley. The people from Haiti, they are black, but we are not. We are Indios, like indigenous. And it was like very strange to me, because for me, the person who was next to me, the driver, he was also black. I would say that I wouldn't notice any difference between the kind of black between the people that he was saying they were from Haiti from Haiti and him. But he was really paying attention and making clear that differentiation. So we don't accept even our own identity, our own origins, because we want to differentiate and defend and take, you know, a defense stage or a defense attitude toward the stereotypes and the prejudice that usually these populations are subject to. In general, in Latin America, so we have more than 132 million of Afro-descendants. That was the last census made in 2015. And especially we have Afro-descendants in Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia. And only, I mean, we covered the 91% of the Afro-descendants in the region, especially in Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia. Actually, in the case of Brazil, Brazil is the second country in the world with most Afro-descendants in the world, after Nigeria. It's the first country in Latin America with more Afro-descendant population in the region. And sometimes we are not, you know, just aware of that. I think that this data, you know, this terms of in terms of representation of the people, just make clear that it's something that we need to pay attention to, because the Afro-descendant population is very present in our culture from our early history, and as I told you before, sometimes we are not aware of how how we integrated this Afro, you know, roots in music, in the words we use, in our food, in our customs, in our habits, and it's very important to start being aware of that. So as you may know, there is not such a thing as race. It's something that is not, I think that many people around the world, scientists and also anthropologists, agree that race is something that doesn't exist. But racism is something that really exists. And racism as the believing that as a mistake of believing that races exist, and actually that there are some people that are inferior to others just because their skin color, their culture, their origin, or their class, or even worse, because of a mixture of those facts. So this is something that is very present in our country, even if we think that it doesn't happen. So for example, this is a sentence or a statement that is very present in Latin American cultures since the independence days. So there was a speech, you know, there was a message that was very reinforced in our cultures with the purpose to create a sense of unity among countries or within the countries. And is this: we are all the same, we are all mestizos, you know, mestizos as the mixture of Afro, Indigenous, white, Caucasian population. We are all the same, we are all mestizos. And sometimes we believe that that's true. I mean, partly it's true because we have people that is really mestizos and we are a mix. But usually what we say is that we don't have diversity in general. I mean, as we are all mestizos, we just deny that we have indigenous populations, that we have Afro-descendants populations, and of course that those populations face some inequalities and have different needs, have different beliefs, have different, you know, also traditions. But by saying that we are all the same, that we are all mestizos, we just try to hide that diversity and also to hide the problems and the issues that recognizing that diversity will, put in a more evident position. And this speech of "we are all mestizos" was something that was reinforced, as I told you, with the purpose to unify the countries from governments, but also as a way to keep, you know, these minorities in a stage with less visibility, I would say, because also the sense that have been present in our countries is a sense of ethnocentrism. It's a sense of that everything that is from outside Latin America, if you are European, if you are from North America, is better. So our indigenous people, that doesn't work much. So this is very hard to say and to acknowledge, but it's something that myself I have experienced sometime during my education. So what does it mean to be, you know, for us to be indigenous? And I would like to say that it affects our self-perception, our identity. So as I told you, the story about my colleague Marco Avilés, he usually shares with me those experiences in which he was not feeling proud about being who they really are. He was trying to hide their origins, their family, their language, and there was this, judgments and prejudice that people, indigenous people, they are lazy, they don't want to work, they just want everything. The government to give them things, and they don't have culture, or they are crazy because they have, those different beliefs or religions or goddess. Yes. So it means a lot of prejudice to be indigenous, and it means have some limitations. For example, there is an actress in Peru that he has some paintings, and there was one time in a museum, and she was making a show of his paintings in that museum, and she decided to go to that museum that day with her typical dress, typical for the community, for her community, and then the security guard in the door didn't allow her to go into the museum to her own exposition because of the way how she was dressed. So being indigenous also implies that you cannot be proud of your own traditions, and you are not free, or you cannot feel free about how to wear, for example. And also that is very interesting, because sometimes we think that the indigenous is it's something of the past, it's something of the history, and it's not really present nowadays. And that's a difference from the with the African descendant population, because with the African descendant population, you can evidently you can easily notice, because of your skin color or your physical traits, that you are an African descendant, or at least a mestizo, a mixture. But for the indigenous people, sometimes those indigenous customs, habits, or even the ways of life, it seems that it's something that was in the past, something that we need to cover, and it's not present. So that's why, for example, my colleagues, Marco, all the time says, I'm an indigenous that lives in a city. Because nowadays, people just don't say things. It's not common to find people that really identify themselves as that. So that's the same. So that impacts how I see myself. Of course, that impacts in my level of self-esteem, for example, and also it impacts on how others see me. How a leader or a potential company a potential employer, how they perceive me in the moment of attending to an interview, and I think that they can perceive me differently if I tell I'm indigenous or I don't tell anything, of course. And I think that it's something that really matters. For example, in this case of Marco, I could say that if I see them, I couldn't tell that he's indigenous. But when he says that, I think that there are other, this kind of tags and words and prejudice that I really am aware that they put on when I just listen the word. And this is very, very, serious. And I think that we need really to take some action on that in Latin America, just to allow people to perceive and identify in a way that they really are, and make sure that identity doesn't put any barriers to the development of the person in the society, in a professional and in a personal level. And this is a screenshot of a video that is also, it moves a lot of emotions in me. And I know that there is a version of this video. I don't remember if it was in the States, but this particular video was, or experiment actually, was made in Mexico. And they choose many kids from his age, let's say about 4 or 5 years old, and they put these two little babies in front of them, and then a person in this side start to ask them, the kids, one by one. They start to ask, okay, which baby is a good person, or which baby is a bad person, which baby is more beautiful, which baby is ugly, which baby you will trust more, which baby you won't trust. And it's very, impressive. Maybe you can imagine the answers, but usually the bad person, the person that you cannot trust, and the ugly was the bad baby, and all the good responses were or the good characteristics were for the white baby. And I think that one of the things that really catch my attention was when the person asked this little kid, why baby looks like more like you, after answering all these questions. And then they really find difficult to decide what baby looks like more than them. And especially if for example, in the case of that kid, you can say that, for example, for his skin color, maybe he will looks like more like the black baby, but they just say that they are more similar to the white baby. And when they are asked why, they say because of the blue eyes, or because he seems to be kind and I'm also kind. So he started to look for other characteristics that are not physical, kind, and more of the personality, try to argument why they were more similar to the white baby than to the black one. So that's very impressive to me. Okay, well, I was just looking at the chat. And so also we have these, stereotypes about Afro descendants in our countries. Usually, what usually happens is that if we see a black person, an Afro descendant, we think that maybe we are in danger, that he or she is a thief, or is an aggressive person, or maybe it's noisy, and maybe they are lazy also, or they don't study. It's difficult, especially in some countries. I would say that in the countries where we have less African descendant population, it's more weird to just imagine a black person in a corporation, in leadership positions, even in the public and also in the private sector. So there are these kind of judgments, as I told you about with the girl from the Dominican Republic, that was, judged as a prostitute. And sometimes it can happen that you are just walking in the street and you see a black person and you just cross the street because you're afraid, these kind of things that really affect, again, how people perceive themselves. And if people think that it's something bad, with being the way you are. You know, and there is other myth. I mean, the first myth was we are all the same, we are all mestizo. And the second myth is that in Latin America, there is no racism, there is only classism. And I say that this is a myth because actually in Latin America, the classism has color. You can see, for example, in my country, in Colombia, there is in the Pacific coast, there is a region when we have most of the African descendant population, and it's the most poor region and population in my country. It's usually on where the opportunities arrive later, or actually don't arrive never. And also it's something that it happens in other countries in Latin America, in Mexico, in Peru, in Brazil, and it's a very sad reality. And even there is, you know, this discrimination and racism between the people that actually are brown, or when you are, for example, African descendant. I mean, there is like a competition on who is less or more dark, and the darker you are, then the more I discriminate you and the more I want to differentiate from you. That's something that really happens. For example, I have my little brother, he's, I would say, moreno, and sometimes my mother tells to him, "Oh, Brian," his name is Brian. "Brian, please don't stay too much time under the sun because you will become black." But he says in a way that it's something bad to be black. You know, you are going to become too black. Please move away from the sun. And I remember that my brother, when he was like growing up, one day he approached to me and told me, "Shirley, you think if I put milk in my skin, that will make me like whiter or something like that?" And that was the first time I just started to realize the effect of our words, and if we were thinking that being black was something that was bad, you know. And actually that happened also. So I mean, the same thing happened to one of my colleagues that is actually Afro-descendant from Colombia, and she also tells the same story, that she was going for holidays to the beach with her friends, and she was all the time in the beach under the trees, trying to find the shadow, while her friends were in the beach with the sun, and she was really like protecting them from the sun to not become darker, and especially because her mom just advised that. So that's, you know, very, very hard to believe or to understand that kind of things happen. And that leads to inequalities in LATAM. So, for example, as you can see in the graph here in the right, there was a study published in the newspaper El País, and it shows clearly how your income in Mexican pesos starts to grow the more whiter. I mean, it's bigger or it's higher, the more whiter or the whiter you are, and the darker you are, no, or the more black you are, you receive more income annually in the country. So we say, what happens that, you know? And to go deeply in that, we can see, for example, here some statistics. 50% of people living in extreme poverty in Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, and Uruguay are the Afro-descendants. The African, you know, descendant people. I mean, they are the 50% of the people living in extreme poverty in those countries. So the poverty has color. African descendant population, they are 2.5 more likely to live in chronic poverty than whites or mestizos generally in Latin America. These are some statistics and facts recollected by the World Bank. In Uruguay, that is one of the most egalitarian countries in the region, the Afro-Uruguayans, for example, are 3 times more likely to be poor this is one of the countries that we have more equality in terms of access to opportunity, for example. In general, also, people from African roots, they have less year of schooling, they have higher unemployment rates, and of course, they have less representation in decision-making positions, both public and private scenarios. And there is, for example, here another statistic that in Colombia, an Afro-Colombian person is 14% more likely to be fined than a white or mestizo person, to be fined by the police. I remember I was close to my university in Colombia, and there was an Afro-descendant person like running. And then I just saw the police going after him and chasing. And I was like, what's happening? He was just running after the bus, and the police just thought that he just stolen some. He have just stole something from someone, and he was, a thief, and that's why he went after him. But he was just running to don't miss the bus and go to his home, go to home. So these kind of things also happen in our countries. And we have, of course, these, harmful and inefficient and dangerous products that affect the lives of Afro-descendant population. For example, as the same stories that you can have in North America or in Europe with the hair. You have these shampoos or creams or whatever that actually are not suitable for curly hair, and actually they damage that hair. They cause that people lose their hair. They cause allergies. They cause actually a lot of injuries. Sometimes some treatments to straighten the hair because it seems that there is something that is called, especially in Central America, you have the pelo bueno and pelo malo. That would be the good hair and the bad hair. And you can guess what is the bad hair. So there is this pressure to always have your hair straight or straightened, and it seems that if you have a curly hair, it's not good because, of course, you are like African descendant, and what all that implies. And regarding, for example, indigenous people, talking about inequalities, according to the BBC, 78% of indigenous children and adolescents live in poverty, compared to 40% of those who speak Spanish. And this inequality, is greater in groups in the Amazon, where the poverty can reach 86%. So it's really a very marginalized population that really don't have access to opportunities, to education, to have some dignity in terms of incomes and quality or level of life, and also especially when we are trying to respect and acknowledge and also value their own traditions and customs and beliefs. I mean, it's not matter, because I know some missions or initiatives, for example, in Colombia, that they want to go to these indigenous communities to give them education, but to make them change their beliefs. So they couldn't believe more in their own traditions or gods. They should be Christians or Catholics, So this is something that not only happened during the colonization process, but it's something still happening right now. And the other statistic that we have here is that 25% of the Peruvian population is indigenous, but only we have 130 seats in Congress. But none of the seats in Congress we have a member of the indigenous population. And this is a more trendy and recent statistic is for the COVID test, the coronavirus test. There was made one test for every 50 citizens on average in general, But when it comes to the Awajun citizens, that is an indigenous group, there was only one test for every 500 citizens. And of course, it also translates to the quantity of deaths, as you can imagine. What happens also in countries like Uruguay, Argentina, and Chile is that in general, people think that there are not Afro-descendants, there are not, Black people or Afro-descendants in our countries, because they were all or killed or die after the colonization process or during the independence wars. And also, if it is true that these countries have less population, actually it's not the case of Uruguay, because they have 8% of the population that is African descendant. But in countries, for example, like Argentina or Chile, that the percentage is less than 1%, sometimes we really deny the truths, the traits that are integrated in our cultures, but we also deny the existence of Afro-descendants in the country. So, for example, I remember one story of this person, African descendant person, that was in the immigration control to enter to the country, and then the person who was in the control station asked her for her papers, her passport, and she just delivered or handed her Argentine ID, and then the person that was in the control immigration station, he said, no, that's not possible, because here in Argentina we don't have African descendant people. You must be from other country. This is false. These kind of stories that we can really hear, because even I'm not from Argentina, but even most of the years that I have been here is what people say. Here you don't have African descendants, and the African descendants that you can find here is because they are like recent immigrants from Haiti or from from any country in Africa, or from Nigeria, or because they are refugees from wars or wherever they are, from Senegal, for example. But it's something that is not Argent. People are not Argentinians. It's something that is in the imaginary. And of course, we have a lot of micro messages and microaggressions in our language, in our everyday interactions, in our TV shows. For example, we have the case of Mabel Lara, the first picture. Mabel Lara is a very well-recognized Colombian journalist, and she tells that one day she was like, she came to present the news in the TV, in the news, in the TV news, and she didn't make time to straighten her hair. She was always straightening her hair, and that time she asked his boss if she could appear and present the news with her natural hair. She did, but at the moment she started to present, she started to receive a lot of Twitter messages saying that she looks like unprofessional. She looks like a prostitute or something not very desired for a girl or for a woman. And then we have some products that we call negrita, for example. That's the case for a very typical food in Peru, that already that word or naming the product in that way was forbidden. And there is in Colombia, in Peru, there have been some TV shows that really ridiculize indigenous people. I think that we're more aware of that, but there are some people that just get, some fun attending or assisting this kind of TV shows. And then we have this kind of expressions. For example, when you are going to greet someone, we can say, hello, my little black person, how are you? And that's something that for us is like being kind or being lovely, but we are not aware that just, not calling the person by her name or his name, but to saying Black person is something that we shouldn't use. For example, I remember that I called my brother like that, hello, my little Black person, and there was one day when he told me, hello, my white person, and for me it was like weird, and then I started to rethinking about that language. And the same story told me one person that was working in the corporate scenario about, that people didn't learn her name because the easiest way was to call her negrito, negrita, or my little Black person. In Spanish would be my negrito, mi negrito, mi negrita. That it would be like a very kind and lovely person to say, to call, to the person you like or even you love. And there are some kind of affirmations or statements like, oh, from the color of your skin, I thought you were from another country. No, I'm from here. That people don't think that in their country they have this diversity, or we have, of course, this kind of, name things that are not correct, that are not ethic, or maybe that are out of the law. We call that is Black. So sometimes we say, I need to exchange money in the black market. There is this case of a very famous woman in Brazil, that is Alexandra. She's French. She's the wife of the consul of the French consul in Brazil, and then she developed a very successful career in Brazil. And sometimes when she was like with him or with other person in these political scenarios, people will think that she was the housemate and even say hi or greet her. And sometimes, for example, when there is an indigenous person that, as Marco, my colleague, he earned a PhD, and make a lot of progress and all stuff like that. So you are, the person that the source of pride for your community, and you are the person that really achieved to do things right because you could differentiate from them. It's like the aspiration, and it's also a way to not valuing this kind of identities. And then sometimes we say to those people, don't complain. What happens is you don't try hard enough. And the thing or the reality or the truth is that we are not aware of the inequalities. We are not aware of the privilege that sometimes most of us have, and the barriers that Indigenous and African descendant population have, to progress and to live in our countries. So I would like to see if there are any questions so far or comments.
Shirley, do you see the questions? There's 2 at the moment.
Yes, I'm reading in the chat. I can give you the link to this video. Yes, I can share the link with Viviana, and after that you can send it by email, but it's a very good video to see because it's shocking. It's shocking. Okay. So we have a question from John. It says, in Colombia, sometimes they don't want to recognize the existence of the Afro-Colombians as an identity to hide the discrimination. What are your thoughts regarding this? Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's and I would say that the roots of that fact is this speech that we are all mestizo, and that we don't treat people with discrimination or with differentiating ways. But I think it's a way of just becoming aware of start putting the conversation in the table, because I would say that most of the part is not because we have, you know, these bad intentions, is because we are not aware of that. It's something that is not talking. It's something that is a topic that we don't talk about, and I think that it's very important to start recognizing. Now we have in Colombia many Afro-Colombian associations that are starting to make to put this topic on the conversation, and especially with the peace agreements, there are some sections that that design specific actions to Afro-Colombians that are victims from the conflict that that has been part of our country. But as it happens with Afro-Colombians, it happens the same with other, you know, dimensions of diversity, for example, women or people with disabilities, or even the victims of conflict, that we just don't want to recognize that difference, because recognize that difference, it put the inequalities, you know, very visible, and it needs that you need to do something, that you need to manage the privilege, that you need to give them opportunities, that you need to recognize where you are and how you have excluded systematically these people in history. I think that is also a fear about just discovering this big elephant in the room, you know. And then we have another question that is, what role do you think the media plays in perpetuating people's views on Indigenous Afro-descendant communities? Well, as it happens with other types of diversity, I think it's the same. For example, this story about Negrito y Negrita, it's something that I learned in a TV show when I was very young, a student at school. So sometimes we learn those stereotypes, we learn those microaggressions, those micro messages from the TV shows, the media, and of course what happens, for example, in the news. If you see, they found 5 Venezuelans in a place where you know, they were stolen an apartment. I mean, of course, media plays a key role in perpetuating those views, in generating more polarization, in promoting more stereotypes, and all that. So it also happens with the example I shared with you at the beginning with Tenoch Huerta. I mean, if we just keep calling Tenoch for this kind of roles, we are just perpetuating the people's views on these communities, you know, the traditional people's views. I think that we have, I mean, the media have a real high responsibility in challenging that. We have a couple of more. In the States, since the murder of George Floyd, corporations and organizations are being asked to not just talk about anti-racism, but also make a change, including the number of Black executives they have at the top of the organization, the number of Black leaders they promote from the low level, and the money they spend with Black-owned business. Do you see that happening in Latin America? No, yet. Absolutely not. I think that what happened, I mean, with the murder of George Floyd, we just started to have the conversation in a more open and in more scenarios. But we are really like more far away of just, you know, trying to put this kind of objectives or goals to making a change. I had some requests from my clients, and those requests was let's start talking about that, because we never put that topic in the table. And that's a difference with Europe or with the United States, that it was already a topic in the table. And now in Latin America, for example, my clients that are corporations and multinationals, is the first time that they are putting the topic in the table. So it will take more time to get to those changes that you are talking about. Maybe in Brazil, I think that in Brazil, they have more development in that sense, because in Brazil, I know about the existence of programs, or education and employment programs that are addressed to African descendant population, and that can have them opportunities to to occupy positions in corporations. So I know a couple of cases of Brazil. I know Catherine wants to answer a couple of questions, if I'm not wrong, or if I am not misinterpreting. Maybe not. Okay. Okay, sorry, I just misinterpreted. There's another question here. So the companies in the US are now also spending a lot of money on making these changes, but the Black community is cautious and a bit suspicious, and we are waiting to see if the changes will really get prioritized. It's similar, different in Latin America. So I would say that in Latin America, companies are not spending a lot of money, as I told before, with this dimension of diversity, more with the ethnic component. It's a topic that they are just starting to explore, to getting aware of. And I would say that even the population here, the Black population, the African American population and Indigenous are even not aware that companies are starting to have this kind of conversation. So we are really behind this kind of changes. But of course, I think in Colombia, for example, as I told you, there are programs specifically for the victims of conflict or with Afro-descendant people. And of course, there is this suspicious about what is really happening, if they are going, to receive what they are promised or not. So yeah, there are a lot of corruption in the middle. There are a lot of fears and barriers and resistance. So that's an issue. In what countries in Latin America it's legal to collect data about employees who are Afro-descendant or Black? Actually, I don't know if there is a country where it's not legal. I don't know if other person in the rooms know, but I wouldn't have that information. For example, in Argentina, we are about to run a diagnostic in a company, and it's something that we are considering to ask in order to know how people self-identify them. But it's a good question. Don't have the answer, but I will look for it. I don't know if there is a country where it's not legal. I don't think so.
Okay, is there any other questions for Shirley? Because we're almost at the end. I think everybody has to go back to work. It was lunchtime. Just giving you, if you have any more questions. Or else, well, we wanted to thank you, Shirley, for this talk. I think we could have spent a lot of more time to discuss about this. Some people asked if it was recorded. It is recorded. We'll find a way with Shirley, of course, how could we send you the recording, and maybe I could give you the last word, Shirley.
Sorry?
The last word, if you wanted to say anything else before leaving.
Okay, well, I just keep thinking about your questions about, what is happening in the US compared to Latin America. And I remember last year with the murder of George Floyd, many people even was like questioning why in Latin America you are not protesting in the same way that it's happening all over the world, And I was, my short answer was that the population are as excluded that even they can't have a voice at that level here in our country. So that's a very short question with a very big issue. Thank you, Monica. Well, there are no more questions for now. So I think that we are done. At least we have any other question.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for being here. Bon, merci à tout le monde d'avoir été là parmi nous. Puis encore, merci Shirley. Donc, on vous souhaite une bonne après-midi et en espérant de vous voir dans nos autres activités. Simplement vous dire que demain, nous avons une autre activité en soirée. Ça va être une présentation sur le racisme dans le milieu universitaire québécois et ça va être suivi après, ça c'est à 19h, à 20h, il va y avoir un spectacle d'un artiste québécois haïtien qui s'appelle Wally. Donc, merci. Au revoir tout le monde.
Merci à vous. Au revoir.